background, that's my son. So
we are recording. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 4. So we're going to start off with chapter 7, number 2, that says, consider what the following statement means to you. Multicultural education needs to be accompanied by a deep commitment to social justice and equal access to resources. Does this statement challenge some of your previously held ideas about multicultural education? For me, honestly, and I don't know if you guys are the same way, I had never heard the term multicultural education before reading this book. I mean, I know that education has, a bunch of different cultures implemented into it, but the actual term multicultural education, it meant nothing to me before this because I hadn't heard it. So I don't think it necessarily challenges my previous notions versus adding on to more ideas, if you will, that I have about it now. Expands upon my ideas and knowledge of.
I think I had kind of the same experience. I haven't ever really thought about multicultural education. Just like we have multicultural nights where we celebrate the culture. Exactly what she's saying does not qualify. That's what we have here.
Yeah.
But there isn't like an education that we have in the school.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the first time examining it in this lens, through this lens.
Yeah, for sure.
I feel like I don't really, I never had the term multicultural education, but in my work, I had like an idea of what multicultural education was just because I worked for a school that was being funded by a grant that for the purpose was to make school better for Indigenous youth. And so like that was something that we constantly were working for. We just didn't have a name for it. But I would say that the statement doesn't really challenge it because we talked a lot at my school. Again, we didn't have the term social justice to talk about it, but we did say about how, we can't really start talking about culture between our students of different cultures until like we give our Indigenous students the tools that they need in order to advocate for themselves and articulate their thoughts on things. So that kind of, to me, definitely lives up to that idea that you need equal access to resources in order to have multicultural education.
For sure. I mean, I think what you said, Catherine, like you talked about this stuff all the time, but there wasn't a name for it. I think that might be what a lot of people, whether or not they're in this class or just in general, like, oh, well, it makes sense that it's called social justice, or obviously it's multicultural education. Just putting the name on it makes it more real, if you will, and more apparent in everyday conversation and things that are going on in schools. But not having a name on it before, I guess for me, it wasn't something that, as guilty as this may sound, that I didn't totally think about all the time because I didn't have a name for it. Sometimes you don't have a name for things, you just kind of brush it away until it comes up again, and then you're like, oh, well, that's what this was about. Oh, but it's multicultural education, so of course I have to think about this.
Yeah, and it's different when I was reading this chapter, like, because I guess you just think automatically your school is multicultural because of all the cultures in it. But then when I was looking at this, like how I was saying that there was the test scores were different levels for the different groups, and I hadn't realized that it had been widening back again. The discrepancy in the different cultures being lower. And of course, I always knew about the money being unequal, but I didn't realize that it was getting worse again. That to me was surprising.
Yeah, I know. I'm going to pull a quote out because this is actually one I really liked. So it's on 156, just talking about with like growing multicultural education and what is culturally responsive pedagogy, said that rather than deficits, students' backgrounds are assets that students can and should use in the service of their learning, and that teachers of all backgrounds should develop the skills to teach diverse students effectively. I think for me that kind of hit a little bit because one of the things that I posted about in another discussion this week, one of the 700 that we have, but so many. But it was, I teach at a very predominantly white school. It's a very affluent school, and a lot of people call it a vanilla school because it's very, very white. There's, I think it's 89% white, like 8 or 9% Hispanic, and then the rest are just kind of dwindling in and out. And there's not a lot of noticeable cultural differences, if you will. I mean, obviously every kid has a different culture and background and everything, but just really embracing every single kid's different culture and something that they should all feel proud of to be able to bring to the table, even in such a predominantly white school. I think that quote for me just hit really hard, if you will, because it totally talks, in my opinion, about my school right now, because we don't do a lot of multicultural stuff. And it is, like you just said, Tony, like it's worsening, if you will.
Yeah.
So
one of my discussion posts this week, I mentioned it, but I've been really thinking about it a lot. When you talk about teaching in a vanilla school, I'd say about 20% of our students were white students and about 80% were Indigenous students, and we did all Indigenous culture, but we never talked about, like where these white students are coming. Like some were conservative Christians, some were from Fairbanks, some were from Anchorage, and like the difference of what that might be and their stories and their experiences and what they bring.
mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about the fact that we just gloss over it all the time. If I had spent more time talking to those students about their experience with culture and they realized that they had a culture, if that would help them then appreciate all the other kids' cultures and talking about cultures, and they wouldn't be like, why are we talking about the Tlingit again? Like, we already went to Tlingit drumming class,
Yeah.
They maybe really appreciate it.
No, I think that's a really good point with them having them recognize their own culture first, because it's somewhere in this book, she mentioned that, a lot of kids think that, oh, well, I don't have a culture.
Yeah.
It's their culture. It's other cultures, but I don't have one. So I think that's a super, super awesome. That's terrible words, but I think that's a really good point, bringing it up, that, making every single kid realize no matter where you come from, what your background is, it's still culture. You still have one.
Yeah.
I like that. That's good. Should we move on?
Yeah.
Okay. Number 3 says, think about 1 or 2 policies in your school that, if changed, might positively affect student learning outcomes. Describe the nature of the change that you think is needed. It has been really hard for me, I don't know about you guys, to think about a policy in my school that has anything to do with this chapter or this book in general. I mean, a lot of the policies I feel like are very general policies in schools. There's the rules, the tardiness policy, the absent, ditching, health policies. If you have a concussion, these are the things that you have to do. If you're going to leave school early, you have to get stuff signed. I can't think of one in my school particularly that I know of. I mean, there may be one that I don't know of, but in my school that has anything to do with this book or with this chapter. Do you guys have one for your schools? Or did you think of one?
I did. But I got it from, really, I had to, once I read the next chapter, then I thought back on this chapter. And that's what helped me to think of the policies.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I could see what my school needed to have a more welcoming, when you enter the school, for all the different cultures that are in my school. There's really nothing of different cultures there. And so if we could have the policy of having kids create more of themselves and put it more on our walls, I think that would help a lot with my school.
Okay, that's a good point. Catherine?
So I was trying to think about not the last school I worked at, but this nature center that I'm working at, which is a little difficult because it's not exactly a school. And like Tanya, I didn't really think about anything until I started reading chapter 8. Mm-hmm. And 2 of the things that I was thinking of is, first, I think that we need a more multicultural staff. We talk a lot about who can be a scientist, but if all of the staff members that are teaching are white, that's kind of saying, except not outwardly saying it, but kind of subconsciously saying scientists are white. You know, we
That's
work
a really good point.
a lot of Hispanic kids, and so like, why don't we have somebody at our organization that can teach bilingually? You know, like none of us speak Spanish, or we speak very poor Spanish, and that's not fair.
Mm-hmm. Uh-oh.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you're frozen.
Okay, so she isn't just frozen on me. I was like,
Oh yeah, she was frozen. Catherine, where'd you go?
Come back.
Hold on, I'm gonna pause. Okay, go.
So wait, did you paused for the multicultural staff part?
So no, you got to the Hispanic kids, and then it was cut off.
Okay, so we work with a lot of Hispanic kids and Latino kids, and so we need to have staff members that represent the people that we serve and that can speak Spanish. And then we also have our chaperone paperwork is kind of complex, and we provide it in English and Spanish. But I was thinking that maybe there are people who would like to be chaperones with their kids' field trip, but they don't feel welcome because they don't want to like fill out all this paperwork and like document themselves. And you know, like just paperwork can be pretty intimidating, and it really depends on what your background is and where you're from, or like your relationship to bureaucratic forms. And I was like, maybe if we could find a way to get rid of the paperwork, we could welcome a greater variety of parents.
That's actually perfect that you mentioned that, because both of those things, as soon as you mentioned those, things sparked in my head. With the paperwork, we had a staff meeting today, and one of she's not an interventionist, but it helps with our Spanish bilingual kids and parents. And so she was talking about different things that parents and kids were really concerned about that teachers were doing that as policies, shockingly enough, that should hopefully, or that should be changed. And one of the main ones was having teachers assign points for getting syllabuses or syllabi assigned. So like, yes, I understand the rules of Miss Kaiser's class, blah, 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 and having students and parents sign it. She was like, well, one, whether they speak Spanish or another language, a lot of our non-English speaking parents aren't literate, so they're not bound to sign something that they have no idea what they're doing. So kids are just going to be forging their parents' signatures. But then another really good point that she brought up, and this was something, and I mean, I'm guilty of this. I have my kids, like 2 points, bring your signed syllabus back so I know that you and your parents have gone over it. It does nothing for their overall grade. But she brought up a really good point, so I'll never do this again, is that a lot of our, especially Mexican students' parents, a lot of them are undocumented. So having them sign something that they have no idea what they're reading is really terrifying for them. So they're not going to do it. And kids are either going to have zeros because their parents refuse to sign it, or kids are going to forge their signatures. So when the time comes when, you know, one of my students' parents comes to parent-teacher conferences and like, well, you knew about these rules. Like, here's your signature on the syllabus. She's like, well, no, wait, that's not mine. So avoiding all of that conflict together. And that was something that I had never thought of before, especially with the undocumented part. So policy change.
Yeah, because there's so many of those kids got taken away from their parents, and their parents were signing off on documents they had no idea what they were really signing. And then all of a sudden they're not with their babies anymore. So that is a huge policy to make sure our schools are careful about too.
Yeah.
And then the whole thing about having teachers of different cultures also, like I work in an ECE through 8th grade, so there's a lot of teachers. And we also are a transitional, I believe it's called. So we have ELS classes where it's the students who speak another language go into that one. And then we have 2 general education classes. Anyway, a lot of those teachers who teach CELS classes are straight from another country. Their languages same as the kids with the accents and everything. So they actually see themselves and their teachers. There's not that many teachers of color, but there are a lot of the Spanish-speaking teachers in the building. So I feel like we could do even better, but it's a good start with my school.
Yeah, I think both of you bring up great points with that. I think that's really good. Like my school, there's over 2,200 kids in my school, and I think we have about 135 to 140 teachers. We have one Black male science teacher, and then our Black female is a social studies teacher, and that's it. We have mixed Hispanic, like half Hispanic, half white teachers. One of them is in the Spanish department. Another one is working with ESL kids. And that's pretty much it. We don't have any Middle Eastern. No, that's a lie. We have one Middle Eastern. We don't have any Asian teachers. And Boulder is, everyone calls it the Boulder bubble. So it's definitely a much different world than the school that I was teaching at before, both staff and student wise. But it's white everywhere. All of our administration is white. All of our counselors are white. Our interventionists, while they speak Spanish fluently and they're from Argentina, one's from Mexico, if you looked at them, they would look like me. They'd be like, why is this white girl trying to speak Spanish? And that's really what I get like all the time. But it's just, there could be a lot more flavor mix up in regards to staffing. And it's not like it's by choice by any means. It's just those are the type of teachers that are drawn to, more so than anything, I think, Boulder and the prowess of the district.
Well,
and I'm guilty of that too. So
there's just not a lot of teachers of color to teach in the teaching program. But I found this I think was in chapter 8 too, was that even white students excel with a teacher that was like huge to me. I was like, what?
I know.
That's kind of cool. I didn't know that.
I wouldn't have thought of that.
I've been thinking about the lack of teaching diversity and where that comes from. At the school that I taught for in Alaska, we had a Mexican American teacher, we had an Asian American teacher, and we had African American teacher, and we had a lot of white teachers, no Native teachers. 80% of our kids were Native, and we were like,
wow,
like we should have Indigenous teachers so they can connect with the kids, but there were no qualified teachers to teach that were also from rural villages. And I got to thinking about it, and it was like the history of education in Alaska, and particularly in Native communities, is like one of force and violence. And it's like being told that you can't speak your language. And I'm like, well, it's no wonder that nobody grew up wanting to be a teacher.
Yeah.
Because we made education such a terrible, scary place that they graduate high school and they're just like, out, peace. So I think if we can make schools less scary, more welcoming, more supportive, and more multicultural, that in turn will lead to more people saying like, I can be a teacher. I'd love to be a teacher.
No, I think that's a great point for sure. Like, I like that terminology you use, the scary place. That why would I had a terrible experience as a student. Why would I ever want to go back as a teacher? I think that's a really good point, that a lot of kids probably feel that, why would I want to go back to a place that I hated for 4 years or however long? I like that.
Yeah, I like that.
Yes. Do you have any final thoughts?
Don't change our groups. Keep it
us.
I don't want to change. I don't want to. I love my group.
I love my group.
Here.
Please. Okay, I'm stopping the recording. Hold on.